Well, I hope you've had a good day today. I hope the week has been good to you so far. It's been a hot one today, so I hope you've found a way, I guess, to stay cool. I hope you're well. Sadly, I know that's not the case for everybody, so if you are sick or you're hurting, please let us know about it. We want to be praying for you. We want you to know that we love you, and if we can do anything at all for you, we just ask that you would ask us. We don't have any announcements tonight, so we can go ahead and jump straight into our study. We're in Ecclesiastes chapter 9. You might remember, just to give a brief recap of what we talked about last week in chapter 8, near the end of our study, we really got into the idea of the doctrine of retribution. Remember, Kohelet looks around and he sees that not everybody receives the consequence that their actions necessitate. And he has a bit of a problem with this. This is not something new. We saw this in the book of Job, right? The doctrine of retribution is a question that we all contemplate, we all think about. Why is it the case that good people oftentimes receive the punishment that the wicked ought to endure? It's a good question. It's one that causes us to scratch our heads. It's one that has been debated for a very long time. But there's also another side to that. Why is it that the wicked receive the consequences that the righteous deserve? And this is something that Kohelet is trying to understand. When we move to chapter 9, we're going to talk about one of the major themes in the book of Ecclesiastes, and we've already talked about it to some degree, but that is the major theme of death. Now, death, sometimes we get the feel in the book of Ecclesiastes that death is a good thing, right? It seems that people that are dead are free of this life, and that is a good thing because life is so chaotic. It's void of meaning, it's void of purpose, and because of that, dead people are just better off. We've seen some verses that seem to indicate this, but what we're going to read in chapter 9 is something totally different. Kohelet seems to be of the mindset that death is actually not the worst thing. Life, I should have said life, is not the worst thing. Death is actually worse than life. And we'll get into that a little more. So let's go ahead and jump in to chapter 9. If you haven't read chapter 9, it's probably a good point to maybe pause the video and read through it. It's not that long. We're looking at, 18 verses? Yep, 18 verses. So just read that and we'll be ready to jump in. If you have read it, let's go with verse 1. But all this I laid to heart, examining it all, how the righteous and the wise and their deeds are in the hand of God. Whether it is love or hate, man does not know. Both are before him. Now, notice just right off the bat how desperate Kohelet has become in his search, right? He's still looking. But notice we return to this idea of why do the righteous receive some things that they don't deserve, namely the punishment that the wicked ought to endure and have poured out on them. Well, notice that the righteous and the wise are in the hand of God. Now, when we talk about the hand of God, what we're talking about, for one, is safety, but we're also talking about power. But we're really kind of wondering here, how does God relate to the righteous, and how does God relate to the wise? Well, this is something, it seems, from what Kohelet says, something that man cannot know. Does God love that type of person? Does God hate that? Let's read the end. Whether it is love or hate, man does not know. Both are before him. So we're trying to understand, how does God view certain types of people? And if we come up with an answer, well, God loves the righteous. Well, why is it that the righteous experience sometimes the punishment that the wicked ought to endure? Well, we keep reading in verse 2. It is the same for all, since the same event happens to the righteous and the wicked, to the good and the evil, to the clean and the unclean, to him who sacrifices and him who does not sacrifice. As the good one is, so is the sinner, and he who swears is as he who shuns an oath. Well, here we go. Now we move into talking about 5 different pair of opposites in order to illustrate the point that is brought to us in verse 2. What is it that the righteous and wicked both have to experience? What is that? Well, it's death. Death happens to everybody. It's going to happen to everybody. The problem is nobody seems to know when it's going to happen to them. We just live with the knowledge that it's going to happen. But notice, this isn't something new. The same event happens and happens and happens. Again, we read at the beginning of Ecclesiastes, especially in chapter 1, humans are caught up in this vicious cycle of life and they just can't get out of it. What has happened is what is happening, and what is happening will continue to happen. You see the cycle. It's just how things work. But notice this business. It happens to both the righteous and the wicked. It happens to the good and to the evil, to the clean and the unclean, to the one who sacrifices and the one who does not sacrifice. As the good one is, so is the sinner, and he who swears is as he who shuns an oath. Now, it might be interesting for us to think about something. Well, when we talk about, especially that last part, he who swears is as he who shuns an oath. Which one's good and which one's bad, right? On the one hand, we might think the one that is unwilling to make an oath may think that they are just incapable, or dare we say unwilling, to maybe follow through with their promise that they made to God. But then on the other hand, we've seen before Kohelet talk about vows and oaths. In fact, Kohelet has said, if you can't fulfill your vow or your oath, you are better off to not make one at all. So basically, watch what you say. Well, that's just something to think about, I guess. But good or bad, righteous or wicked, all are going to experience death. This is the point that we need to get from chapter 2, or chapter 9, verse 2. Verse 3, This is an evil in all that is done under the sun, that the same event happens to all. Also, the hearts of the children of man are full of evil, and madness is in their hearts while they live, and after they go to the dead. Now, what is this evil that is being talked about in verse 3? Well, this evil that Kohelet really dreads is death. Now, notice that life isn't something that is very good. I mean, notice what he says about the children of man. They are full of evil and madness. It's not like they're doing good things. It's not like life is really good for a whole lot of people. But there's an evil worse than that. Death. And that's what Kohelet is trying to get us to understand. Now notice when we talk about the children of man here, full of evil. Well, we've already talked about that in the Old Testament, and we've already seen this in Ecclesiastes, that the word for evil has a very broad range of meaning, right? It's not always talking about moral evil. Well, it just so happens that it actually is talking about morality here. We're discussing the moral sphere of things. What do the righteous have to look forward to? I'm being sarcastic. They have death. What do the wicked have to look forward to? Again, being sarcastic. death. It's the same for everybody, and this is the great evil that bothers Kohelet. Verse 4. But he who is joined with all the living has hope, for a living dog is better than a dead lion. Now we've seen that life is not all it's cracked up to be. Life is pretty miserable. Now, of course, I'm speaking in terms of what we've read in the book of Ecclesiastes so far. But notice what Kohelet has just said. Life is still better than death, even though he hasn't found meaning in life, even though he hasn't found the ultimate purpose in life, even though he's reduced life down to simply trying to find some type of pleasure that can just maybe temporarily satisfy you until death comes. Life is better than death. And notice how he illustrates this point. For a living dog is better than a dead lion. How were dogs viewed in the ancient Near East? Well, they were not how they didn't view dogs in the ancient Near East how we view dogs today. They're not these cuddly pets. They're not animals that you would ever let into your bed. Dogs are nasty. Dogs are scavengers. Dogs would eat dead things. Dogs are disgusting. But if that dog that's disgusting is alive, it's better than the lion that's dead, the lion that was greatly esteemed by people in the ancient world because of its power. The dog is better than the dead lion. Life is better than death. But notice what was said at the beginning. But he who is joined with all the living has hope. We might think, well, maybe Kohelet is coming around. Maybe he's realizing that life isn't as bad as it once seemed. Well, let's read the next verse to figure that out. Verse 5, for the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing, and they have no more reward, for the memory of them is forgotten. So the living have hope. Well, this seems to be sort of a false hope. Because although it's better to be alive than dead, every person that's alive knows that death is inescapable. They walk around knowing that at some point their life is going to come to an end, although they do not know when it's going to come to an end. So that virtually renders them incapable of ever finding any satisfaction in life because the thought of dying sort of drowns out any pleasure a person might have. Why is it better to be alive than dead? It seems, based on what Kohelet tells us, the reason is the living are conscious and the dead are not. That's the benefit. The living are self-aware, the dead are not. The dead, they don't have any more reward. Now, we've talked about before, what is Kohelet's view on an afterlife? It doesn't seem from what we read that he believes in an afterlife. Now, like we've talked about before, that's no problem for us, right? We shouldn't have to force something into the book that's not there. This is Kohelet's thoughts. Not everything we read, right? We talked about the speeches of Job's friends. Not everything they said was true. Same here. That doesn't mean that an afterlife doesn't exist. The Bible certainly, especially the New Testament, tells us there is an afterlife after this life. In fact, that's why we ought to be faithful in this life, so that we can be with God in the afterlife. But nevertheless, there's no more reward. So it seems that we're talking about a physical reward here. Well, after you die, there's no more physical reward. There's no more pleasure that you could possibly experience. There's no consciousness, it seems. This is the problem. Notice verse 6. Their love and their hate and their envy have already perished, and forever they have no more share in all that is done under the sun. Now again, we've talked about just because Kohelet favors life over death doesn't mean that life is something that everybody should look forward to. Notice that this verse tells us life is going to be hard, because life is full of good emotions, but life is also filled with very terrible, very acute emotions. Look, life is filled with love, but if life is filled with love, it's certainly capable of being filled with hate and being filled with jealousy and being filled with envy. People are going to experience these types of emotions in life. Life is not always going to be good. This is what Kohelet is trying to tell us. So what are we to make of life? Nothing more than we've already read. Verse 7, Go, eat your bread with joy and drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already approved what you do. Again, there doesn't seem to be any ultimate purpose or any ultimate meaning in life, so try to find the simple pleasures. Go eat and go drink. Eat, drink, and be merry. We all have read that in the book before. Verse 8, Let your garments be always white. Let not oil be lacking on your head. In other words, don't miss an opportunity to experience good in your life. When you have the opportunity to do something, go do it. Experience some pleasure. Wear your best clothes, the clothes that no doubt were going to be more expensive. Wear those things. Don't miss an opportunity to be refreshed by oil that can be poured over your head. Don't miss out on those things, because that is what's going to give you momentary satisfaction. Now we think about why white clothes. Well, we're dealing with a climate that is very, very hot, right? So white would do a great job of reflecting heat. Some people have tried to make the argument, well, white is a symbol of purity, and this is why we're wanting to wear these types of clothes. Well, the oil that's poured over someone's head, well, why would they pour oil over someone's head? Well, if it's very hot, this is a way a person's skin can be replenished so that it doesn't dry out. Just a neat point, maybe. We are out of time. I want to stop here because we don't have enough time to talk about verse 9. We'll get into that next week, Lord willing. I hope you have a great rest of the week. God bless.